Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the latest webinar from Lymphoma Action. And this afternoon, we're going to spend an hour on lymphoma, work, and you. And I am delighted for the next hour to be joined by a spectacular panel of experts. We have Angela Matthews, who's the Head of Policy and Research from the Business Disability Forum, and Amy Thompson, who's a Benefits Advisor with the Maggie Centre in Manchester. Both Angela and Amy will take us through short presentations in just a moment. We're also joined by Lou and Claire, a couple of amazing individuals with lived experience of lymphoma and continuing to work. So without further ado, Angela, can I ask you to give your presentation, please?
Hello everyone, I'm Angela, Head of Policy and Research. I'm just going to take you through some of the key rights that you have in the workplace and how to navigate some of those things. There's going to be a bit of legal talk, and forgive me for that, but I will explain what I'm talking about. So hopefully you will stay with me through the next 10 minutes. So the key piece of legislation that gives us our rights in the workplace about equalities is the UK Equality Act 2010. It looks at different groups, and these groups are protected from discrimination in the Equality Act. One of those groups is disability. These groups are called protected characteristics. Therefore, disability is a protected characteristic. Now, some of you might be wondering why is she talking about disability immediately? Stay with me, I will come to just that in a second. So in the UK Equality Act, you have a disability if you have a physical or mental impairment, and that impairment has a substantial and long-term adverse effect on your ability to carry out normal day-to-day activities. What a mouthful, right? Basically, if you have a condition which is long-term, it's lasted for 12 months already, it's going to last for another 12 months, you are covered. And so what the Equality Act also gives us is a small range of conditions that are automatically covered. So what this means is that if you were to take a disability discrimination case to an employment tribunal because you feel you've been discriminated against by your employer, the first thing the court would need to decide is, does this individual have a disability under the Equality Act? And that's where this definition comes in. The court would look at, does this person have a physical mental impairment? And does that physical or mental impairment give a substantial and long-term adverse effect on how they live day to day? As I said, there are some conditions where the court doesn't have to go through deciding if your condition is a disability. These conditions are what we talk about in terms of being automatically covered from the point of diagnosis. Cancer is one of them. What this means is if you have cancer, including lymphoma, of course, cancer is the word used in the Equality Act though, or if you ever have had cancer, you have a disability as per the Equality Act 2010. It gives you equalities rights and protection from discrimination under this piece of legislation. What it means is, in this context, this very legal context of the Equality Act, you have a disability. But whether you choose to say you are disabled or that you are disabled, that you have a disability, that's really different, and that's your own decision about how you identify and talk about your experience of having lymphoma. But as per the Equality Act, if you have cancer, if you ever have had cancer, you are protected under the disability provisions of the UK Equality Act. So why is this important? It is important because in the Equality Act, there is an additional duty on employers for people who are disabled as per the Equality Act. This additional duty is the duty to make reasonable adjustments. So what are reasonable adjustments? The Equality Act says a reasonable adjustment is where something puts a disabled person or someone who has a disability as per the Equality Act, including people with cancer, as we just saw, at a substantial disadvantage compared to non-disabled people. If that happens, an employer must take, quote, reasonable steps to avoid the disadvantage. So what are these barriers? These barriers in the Equality Act are called a provision, criterion, or practice. What a mouthful again. Really, this is legal talk. In plain speaking, reasonable adjustments are just doing something differently to remove a barrier that you experience because of your cancer. So what is this something, this sort of lovely sort of clunkiness that legal people love? Provision, criterion, or practice? In reality, in your workplace, this is policies, it's the practices that your employer does, it's the way your employer behaves, and it's the services they provide. Occupational health, for example, wellbeing provision, your employee assistance program. Any service, any policy, anything your employer does that could put you at a disadvantage, that's when reasonable adjustments come into play, removing barriers that you experience because of your cancer. So some adjustments can be altering sick pay. It might be allowing time off for appointments. It might be getting a more comfortable chair or keyboard or computer. And it might be allowing larger breaks or rest times throughout the day. They are examples of adjustments. Now let's break adjustments and reasonable adjustments down a little bit, because this is really important. And a lot of employers know this, but my research shows that a lot of employees don't. And what it means is that employees don't always know how their employer is deciding what is reasonable for them in terms of reasonable adjustments. In case law, case law is when an employment tribunal has made a decision. Those decisions give us information about what we should do in practice. And some cases have told us what reasonableness is. So when we see the term reasonable adjustments, we should see two separate things: the adjustment, and then if that adjustment is reasonable. So really, when we look at the phrase reasonable adjustments, it's the wrong way around. It should be adjustments reasonable, because we first identify the adjustment and then we identify if it's reasonable. The process that your employer should be going through is as follows. So, first of all, is the duty to make a reasonable adjustment actually required? So, go back 2 slides and we will remember that a reasonable adjustment has to be made where someone is experiencing barriers because of their disability, for us, cancer. So, an employer needs to consider, is that person experiencing a barrier or a difficulty, a disadvantage? And then, is that barrier being experienced because of the disability? So are you experiencing these difficulties at work because of your cancer? That's the first question an employer has to go through. Secondly, the employer, ideally through a conversation, a really sort of collaborative, helpful, respectful conversation with you, okay, what adjustments would remove that barrier? If you are tired each day and you're really struggling with some new treatment, some new medication, what is going to help you find that easier? What is going to help you keep working and be your best? It might be different hours. It might be changing your hours for a week or a month. It might be allowing bigger lunch breaks. It might be starting later. So number 2 here in this process, what adjustments would remove the barrier? This is like a brainstorm between you and your line manager. Okay, let's get everything on the table. What would potentially help? The third step is all of those adjustments we've just spoken together between me and my line manager. Which of those adjustments are reasonable? So when deciding what is reasonable, this is what your employer is considering or should be considering. There are 5 key things. First of all, is that adjustment effective? What effective means is, would this adjustment actually remove the difficulty that you are experiencing at work? Secondly, how practicable is it? So, for example, if one of the adjustments is going to take a year to put in place, for example, changes to the building, is that actually practical? You know, what are you going to do in the meantime? How are you going to cope in the meantime? So actually, if an adjustment takes a load of time to put in, for example, it's not massively practical, perhaps. Thirdly, the cost. So how much would this adjustment cost? And what resources can we use to help pay for it? With resources to help you pay for it, we're talking things such as the government's Access to Work scheme, which can help employers pay for adjustments for employees. We're also talking about any insurance schemes that your employer has that can help put adjustments in place. Here, within cost, really importantly, we are looking at the resources of the whole organisation to help fund adjustments for you. So this isn't just between me and my line manager in my team and what budget we have available. This is about considering the cost and the financial resources of the whole organisation. That is really important because in law, it is an employer's duty to make adjustment. Employer in terms of the whole organisation. It is not an individual line manager's duty. So in terms of, I often hear people saying, I've been told that we don't have a budget for that. You need to be, line managers and employers need to be looking at the financial resources of the whole organisation when considering cost. Fourthly, disruption. So how disruptive would it be to others and to the business to implement this adjustment? Again, we often see this when in the 2 most common situations I hear of is when making alterations to a building, for example, and to make the alteration, you might have to move 2 whole offices for a substantial period of time. You have to move people around, that affects other people's adjustments, and so you have to think about how disruptive to this and to the business would it be. Disruption is also a big one when coming to looking at flexing hours or changing your duties temporarily. So if you're asking for time off, under this consideration of disruption, it's not a kind word, is it, to think in terms of, oh, I need time off for my appointments and it's being considered, is this disruptive? But this is the legal language that's used. Line managers would be considering, well, actually, if Ange goes to the hospital each Friday and Monday morning for the next 6 weeks, what's the impact on her team? So they're the kinds of considerations we have under disruption. And lastly, risks. So for example, would making this adjustment cause any health and safety risk to the individual the adjustment's being made for, or to anyone else in the organisation? Some things that are often considered here is if you change your working day to a day when not many people are in the office and actually you need someone with you to exit the building, then that's not going to be amazingly healthy or safe for you to agree for you to come into the office when no one else is around if you need help to exit the building because no one else would be there. So these 5 things decide the reasonable bit of a reasonable adjustment. So remember a few moments ago we spoke about identifying the adjustments with your manager, getting all of the ideas on the table, and then your manager, the employer, decides which of them are reasonable. So we can already see that in law there is space for conversations. It's about the employer and the employee working together to find solutions that work for everyone. The sad truth is that doesn't always happen. Employers are not always kind. Employers sometimes don't have this, have a collaborative, open process with their employees. A lot of the time, I find that that's not intentional. It's just that the employer doesn't know what to do, or line managers haven't been equipped with what to do, and therefore it just comes across as we won't do anything, or slightly sort of come across as quite defensive. There are, of course, employers who just don't get it and are sadly unkind. So this is my last slide, and I just wanted to leave you with this message. We have rights under the Equality Act, as I've described. Reasonable adjustments are also our right. So when we have conditions, when we are making phone calls, when we're dealing with social services, we've got to deal with our benefits over there, then going for treatment over there, arranging the next appointments, and then just coming home and having to deal with our bodies. We have to be kind to ourselves. When I mentor people and they tell me they've had a bad experience at work, we talk about that. We talk about rights. We talk about what the employer should have done and what they should not have done or said. And to have this unkind employer in your life, we sometimes need to think, we could take an employer to tribunal. That will cost time, energy, and money. I'm not saying don't take your employer to tribunal if they treat you badly, but I think as people with conditions, with fluctuating energy and time and money caused by having a condition, we need to consider the time and money that we have, the physical energy and the emotional energy that fighting for rights can take. So I always encourage my mentees to think about a couple of things. What is important to you and your life right now and in the immediate future? And what is the kindest thing to yourself to let go of? Sometimes it's not about fighting for rights with an employer who isn't pro you. And sometimes it is right to fight for our rights, but sometimes in our situations with health conditions where we don't know what the future will be, we have to surround ourselves with kind networks. And sometimes that just means walking away and finding a kinder employer. I will leave you there. Thank you, Dallas.
Angela, thank you so much. That was informative and inspiring, all in the one go. And I'm sure there'll be lots and lots of questions that will come up later in the webinar for you. But for now, can I invite Amy to give her presentation, please?
Hello, so my name's Amy Thompson and I work at the Maggie's Cancer Centre in Manchester. I'm going to be presenting a short guide to benefits and grants today. So in this session, we will briefly cover what benefits advice includes. We'll go through some of the benefits that you or your carers may be entitled to, and we will finish on where you can get support with the benefit system. Please note this advice is centred around people of working age. So one of the biggest things that I hear in the centre here is that actually it's the financial impact of cancer that is almost as worrying as the medical impact. We've just got a quote here about how people are really worrying about their bills, and especially at the time now with the cost of living crisis, finances are kind of at the top of everyone's agenda at the moment. So when I see somebody, and general other benefits advisors would do the same, they will check what benefits and grants somebody may be entitled to. They will help support with the benefit claims because often they do involve some very long forms. We will help challenge benefit decisions when the Department for Work and Pensions don't get it right. And we will also signpost to other specialist organisations where appropriate. So you may find that if you have a lymphoma diagnosis, you need an extended period of time off for your treatment. And you may need to go off on sick leave from work if you are employed. So it's always worth checking your contract first of all in case there's any contractual or company sick pay. If there isn't any sick pay through work, the legal minimum is statutory sick pay. Now that is something for agency workers as well as employees. But you have to have been off for more than 4 days in a row and your earnings are on average at £123 a week. Statutory sick pay is paid by the HMRC for a maximum of 28 weeks, and you don't need to do anything. Your employer should sort all this out for you. The current rate is £99.35 a week, so you may find that that's quite a lot less than you are used to getting through work. It's important to note that even if you are getting contractual sick pay, the statutory sick pay may also be going on in the background, and your employer's just kind of topping you up to half pay or to full pay as per policy. So it's always worth checking your pay slip or speaking to HR about the statutory sick pay. So some people may not be entitled to statutory sick pay. They might have exhausted it all, or you may be self-employed and therefore not entitled to any statutory sick pay. So what can you claim instead? So there is a sickness benefit from the DWP called New Style Employment and Support Allowance, which I'll call ESA for short here. ESA is dependent on your national insurance contributions, and they will just look at the last 2 to 3 tax years. It isn't means tested, so it doesn't matter if your partner is earning or you have some savings, or even whether your company sick pay is still being paid. As long as you've exhausted your statutory sick pay or you're not entitled to statutory sick pay, you could claim this. It can be affected by personal pensions and payment protection insurance, so it's always worth seeking advice. To get ESA, you must be covered by a fit note from your GP or the hospital, and then you will also have to have an assessment. So the current rate starts off at £77 a week, and there is a 13-week assessment period. So unfortunately, the DWP don't just go off what your sick note says. They want to do their own assessment. So they'll send you a form, and often you may have to have a further assessment face-to-face, by telephone or by video as well. Once they've made a decision, you'll be placed in one of the 3 groups. So they'll either say, actually, we think you're fit for work, or they'll say, okay, we understand you're not fit for work, but you may be able to take part in some work-related activities. So they'll keep you on the £77 assessment rate, and you'll have certain conditions you have to meet to get that. Or if you are really unwell and they can see that you are having cancer treatment, you'll be put into the support group, which means that they would leave you alone. They're not going to be asking for any further fit notes, and they will increase your payment to £117.35 a week. Statutory sick pay or employment and support allowance is a little amount. It's not as much as what you may have been receiving from work. Or you may not even be entitled to the New Style Employment and Support Allowance if you haven't been earning enough to pay national insurance. So what then? So we would always then have a look whether there are any means tested benefits that you could apply for. And I'm sure a lot of you will have heard of universal credit, which is a fairly new benefit system, which has replaced a lot of the old or legacy benefits. So universal credit is a household benefit. So it's not just for you as an individual, it's looking at you and a partner if you have one. It is fully means tested, so any savings or any other income in the household will be taken into consideration. You don't have to be out of work. You could be in work, but maybe on a lower income, and the universal credit would top you up. It's not dependent on national insurance contributions. And the way the payment works is it looks at what your household situation is. So it looks at whether you have any housing costs, any children and childcare costs, and there may be extra money if you're found unfit for work. So just like the employment and support allowance we discussed, they will do their own assessments of why you aren't able to work at the moment. And after that 13-week assessment period, your money from universal credit could increase if they find that you aren't fit for work. You apply for universal credit online, and if you can't use online systems, you may be able to do a telephone claim. It's really important to seek advice on universal credit, especially if you are on any other benefits already, because once you've applied for universal credit, you can't then go back to the benefits you were once on. So we always need to do a better off check to see if universal credit is beneficial for you. Universal credit doesn't include help with council tax. We get asked this a lot. Council tax is always going up and it's an extra cost. So you may want to have a look at whether you'd be entitled to any council tax support. Now this is paid by your local authority and usually you apply online through their website. It is means tested again as universal credit is. There are also some discounts available for council tax. So if your household has any students in, has a carer in, or if you've had it adapted for any disabled facilities, there may be a discount available to you. There's also something called a discount for severe mental impairment. So often if lymphoma has spread to the brain, for example, or somebody is having severe cognitive difficulties, you may be able to get some discount there, which wouldn't be means tested. This is a really useful link just here on this slide to cover all of the help with council tax. So you might want to have a look at this in your own time. So I've just put this quote on. It's quite outdated. It is from 2017 and it's from a report that Macmillan did. But I imagine it's still similar, if not worse, in the current conditions. So the quote just reads that 4 out of 5 people with cancer are on average £570 a month worse off as a result of their diagnosis. So there is another benefit that people can consider, and it's a disability benefit called Personal Independence Payments, or PIP for short. Now this is for working age people, and it's not about you having lymphoma, it's about how your condition is affecting you day to day with your mobility and your everyday tasks. So to qualify for PIP, you need to have had your condition for 3 months and expect it to continue for a further 9 months. So it is having a long-term condition. Now it's not means tested at all, and it is just for the individual with the health condition. You can receive up to £156.90 a week. But what you may get will depend on how many points you score. So it works as a points-based system. To start off an application for personal independence payment, you have to order a form, you have to fill in the form, and then you may have to have a further functional assessment with a healthcare professional. So it's quite a lengthy process, but we would be here as a benefits advice service to help you through it. We haven't got time to go into all the activities that PIP would consider and score your points on today, but I've just put them on the screen here for you to get an idea. Now, it's just worth noting that it's not as black and white as yes, I can do that, or no, I can't. It's looking at the difficulty you have with that activity. So does that activity take you more time than it used to? Do you ever need to use an aid, such as a rail, to do the activity? Do you have to do it at a different time of day than you used to because you can't do it first thing? You need to wait for your medication to kick in. Do you ever need to ask for help to do this activity from a family member? So it's looking at all of those things really, and considering any of the challenges you have with it that you may not have had before. And a benefits advisor would be able to talk through that and kind of unpick where you might be struggling. Now in Scotland, for our Scottish viewers, PIP is actually being replaced by adult disability payments. So people who are already on PIP will be changed over by 2025, I think it is. They plan to do it all. And new claims for PIP would now come under the adult disability payment. The process isn't quite as lengthy, although there is 2 forms that you'd have to fill in. They don't have a functional examination or assessment, but you may have to have a short conversation with a healthcare professional before a decision is made. The rates and the activities that are considered for the adult disability payment are the same as with PIP. Again, it's not means tested. So it really doesn't matter whether you are getting anything from work or even still in work. It's just if you have a health condition that is impacting you with your day-to-day needs. There is also some help with transport if you have a lymphoma diagnosis, potentially. So if you have any difficulties with walking or any reason why you may need to park close to your destination, you can apply for a blue badge, a disabled parking badge. Now, there are fees in certain parts of the UK, and you usually have to apply via your local authority's website. For people who are on a mobility part of a benefit, such as PIP or adult disability payment, you may be automatically entitled to a blue badge. But for those of you that aren't, you can still apply, but you may be subject to a further assessment. There's also travel passes, for example, rail cards and bus passes for disabled people if you meet the criteria. So check with your local authority, check your local transport system for information on these concessionary passes. Now, often the benefit processes are long, as I said, and sometimes they're just not enough. They just don't cover all the bills. So we would always look at whether somebody would be entitled to any grants as well. So there is the famous Macmillan grant of £350 to help out with your additional costs. So for example, all your hospital appointments, getting to them, it costs a lot with petrol going up. Heating costs, obviously at the moment as well, that's even worse. And sometimes you might need a new appliance, but you just don't have that disposable income to buy it. So that £350 is something that we could look at for you. There is a financial criteria and you can only have one in any 6-year period. There's also benevolent funds depending on which industry you may have worked in, so we would always just check that out as well. Turn to Us is a national charity and they have a website with a huge database of grants, so it's always worth having a look at that too, because there are all sorts of grants available depending on your circumstances. One more thing is just to ask your hospital as well if there are any grants, because often the hospital charities have a grant for people who are really in need and who are worried about the costs of getting to treatment or who are worried about getting time off work. Help with health costs now. So in some parts of the UK, you will get free prescriptions anyway, but in England, unfortunately, we usually have to pay. Now, for anyone with a cancer diagnosis, you are exempt from prescription costs. So you would need to ask your GP for an exemption card, and then you'll get them for free for 5 years. Now, this covers any health costs, as I said, for any prescription, but it's because you are affected by a cancer diagnosis or the side effects of treatment. You may also get help with dental costs, glasses, and travel to hospital through the NHS low income scheme, or some people who are on certain means tested benefits would also be able to get help with these things. So we'll just move on to carers now. Who've got any carers in the audience? So carers, there is often a lot of queries because they will have to take time off work potentially, and there will be extra costs for them in looking after the lymphoma patients. So there is a carers allowance of £69.70 a week paid by the Department for Work and Pensions. You would qualify for this if you are caring for more than 35 hours a week, but there are some earnings rules on there if you are still trying to juggle caring and work, which most people are. The person you care for must receive a disability benefit and the daily living part of that benefit. And you usually apply online for the carers allowance, and it can be backdated if you met the criteria up to 3 months ago. Now, carers allowance wouldn't be affected by any of your household savings or household circumstances apart from earnings. If you're on universal credit, you could claim a carer element on there. It works just the same as carers allowance, where somebody you care for has to be receiving a disability benefit, but there are no earnings conditions. So you could be in full-time work and get a carer element on your universal credit. It's always worth speaking to your local council and the social services team there to ask for a carers assessment too, because there may be some things that they can put in place to support you as a carer. So I think the key message on this very quick tour of benefits is that it's a very complex system. There's so much to it and it's always changing. But I just want you to take away that there is help out there. You should always seek advice. And I've just put on a list of different places where you can seek advice from. So we've got Maggie's, so you can find your local Maggie Centre. We've got Macmillan. We've got housing associations, local authorities, welfare rights teams, or the citizens' advice. So don't feel alone in this. Come and have a chat with somebody and they will help support you through this process.
Amy, thank you so much. Another brilliant presentation, and yourself and Angela have answered many actually of the questions that came up from people before the webinar, so thank you so much for that. I think it's important now that we put a little bit of lived experience into this webinar. So I'm going to ask Lou if she wouldn't mind sharing her lived experience with us. Lou.
Thank you, Dallas, and thank you for inviting me to share my story today. So hi everyone, I'm Lou. I work in the public sector and have done for 39 years. And I had that cancer diagnosis. It started, the symptoms started in December 2016, but my final diagnosis was in August 2017. Now, for me, up until that point, when we talk about lymphoma and in work, so my diagnosis was stage 3 non-Hodgkin follicular lymphoma, so one of the most common. And I was told, of course, I was told that it is treatable, but is incurable currently. So the thing around workplace adjustments or reasonable adjustments, or more commonly known, is really important to know, first of all, what is in your organisation. Angela talked earlier around having policies and procedures. So for me, I made sure that I read up on our policies to have an understanding of what was going to support me. So having reasonable adjustments during that assessment stage before the diagnosis was really key. So I had that conversation with my line manager and we agreed to keep reviewing at every stage, every appointment, what was happening. So for me, the first thing is that importance of sharing your experience to whoever you feel comfortable sharing it with, whether that's your line manager or another line manager. But you might not want to share with the rest of your work colleagues at that point. So post-diagnosis, so I had my diagnosis and the treatment started within inside 2 weeks. So I was on annual leave and then the consultant had signed me off work for 3 months. So at that point, there was very little barriers, I suppose, to my workplace and me. So I took that time off, I started my treatment and then was signed off for another 3 months. So altogether I had 6 months off work. Now for me, I was lucky, that was on full pay. But my line manager, we had an agreement that I would contact her every month for the first 3 months, but then every 2 weeks as the time near to returning to work came to fruition. So I went through an occupational health service referral. That was really beneficial because it gave me access to other medical advice alongside my GP and especially my consultant. And I was very lucky, and I still am, because my consultant, really gave the best support and signposting advice. So when I returned to work, this is when workplace adjustments changed again. So when we think about what's reasonable and time off to attend appointments, then becomes into a phased return for me at that point. So I was on reduced duties, I was on reduced time to allow me to become more relaxed and confident in what was my new normal. Now I'm still in remission, but my workplace adjustments or reasonable adjustments continue. They change year on year dependent on where I'm at, what assessment I have, and other conditions that may be attributed or associated with the lymphoma. So the importance of understanding your workplace policies, talking to those who can give you the right support. And the other thing as well, I was also allowed time to attend to see the oncology psychologist because my mental health took a very serious downturn. And so having that support meant everything, helped me cope, not just in work, but also outside of work as well. So when you think about asking for reasonable adjustments, please do seek that help and support. It really does work. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing, Lou. Thank you so much. Claire, can I ask you if you wouldn't mind telling us how your lived experience has been?
Yeah, of course. Thank you for inviting me today. I'm Claire, and I was diagnosed with peripheral T-cell lymphoma, a non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and that was in November 2016. By the time I was diagnosed, I'd been unwell for about a year and a half, significantly unwell that it was impacting my work, and I'd had accrued quite a bit of time off by then. And my employer was quite supportive, and I'd already had to have reasonable adjustments because of the way it presented myself. I lost my voice, and I'm a teacher, so I ended up losing my voice completely and having speech therapy to start again. So actually some of my reasonable adjustments were things like having headphones and a microphone so that I could speak in my lessons or recording demonstrations. I'm an art teacher, so I was creating video recordings of those. And having extra TA support on hand in some lessons because of my ability to communicate at that point. My health took a downturn again. I got hospitalised. Luckily, they wouldn't let me out until they figured out what was going on. And a couple of weeks after being in hospital, they found out that it was the lymphoma. That was actually a really positive thing for me because I finally found out what it was that was going on, and it put me in a much better position because I knew like what was going to happen then to fix it, and I could start talking to work and getting a plan together. I think the key thing with work is trying to get as much information as you can from all the sources, so speaking to the consultant and nurse practitioner, gathering as much information as you can, because I think employers, I mean, obviously we've heard earlier that not all employers are great, but my employer was really good and wanted to help, but I needed to gather as much information as I could to present that to them, to say, actually, these are the things that I'm going to need. And I sat down with HR quite early on as well, because as a teacher, I wanted to keep working. I wanted as much normality as long as I could. But I knew that my appearance was going to change. I was going to be starting a cycle of chemotherapy. I was going to lose my hair. It was going to be very visible. So it was how to approach that with the students ahead of time to make it so that it wasn't a big deal. How I communicated things with colleagues as well. I discussed all of that, so that was comfortable coming into work. The school also had lots of things in place through like their insurance policies that I didn't know about. So I was able to get some reflexology, which was actually really helpful for me for just my mental health and just looking after myself as I was going into all of this. In the end, my immune system got so poor that I couldn't stay in the classroom, so then I had to take a period of time off work. And eventually I had to have a stem cell transplant. So it actually took me out of work in total for about a year, and well, it was about a year and 3 months. So luckily with my job, I had full pay for a period of time and then half pay for a period of time. And because I knew that was coming, I could kind of had to manage my finances in the first bit to manage for the next bit. And then statutory sick pay, I think it was, for the remainder. I had about, or it maybe was 3 months without any pay. So it was just, there was a chunk of time. They were really good when I went back to work though. I did a phased return like Lou did. I also had a position of responsibility in school. And when I went back, I didn't take any of that responsibility on. I just went back as classroom teacher and phased back in, and then started a different role the year after. But I decided for myself, that I wanted to go part-time. So actually I now work 0.8, which is 4 days out of the 5. And I did that really just to give myself the rest that I need, and to pursue other things really. So my work has changed, but those were, those are the main things. I think the other element that Lou had said as well is about mental health. And actually the hardest time was after that time off, going back into the world of work again and going back into the real world. And I found that difficult, and I did have some counselling at that point, and that was actually through work as well. So yeah, just communicate with your employers, talk about what you need, get as much information as you can, and then just be as proactive as you can, because people do want to help you, but they don't always know what's there.
Claire, thank you so much. I'll invite the panel back on screen, but it's so heartening to hear that you and Lou had positive experiences in the workplace. That's great to hear, because we know that it's not the case for everybody, is it? There we are. So do our other panelists want to pop themselves back on the screen? There we are. Fantastic. Thank you all. That has been incredible, and it has just left us just 10 minutes for some questions, but let's see what we can do with that time. And I'm going to start with a question that we've had from lots and lots of people, and it's probably going to come in your direction, Angela, and that's about declaring having lymphoma at the point of interview or the point of being offered a job. What's the responsibility of us to declare that cancer, that disability at the point of employment?
Absolutely nothing. So the duty for your employer to make reasonable adjustments is not dependent on you sharing that you have cancer. That's the law. I think what we've heard from both Lou and Claire is that they owned this, and that enabled them to think about what they might need. And what I really heard from Claire as well, and actually Lou as well, is about our employers might not know how to deal with this, but both Claire and Lou sort of thought about that themselves as well and didn't leave it to the employer. And I don't want to put words into their mouths, but sometimes we find that the best experiences are where the individual thinks about what they need and goes to the employer and says, look, this is the situation for me. It would really help if you could do X. This is how I intend to make it work. It might mean that I work later and I can add up the hours then. It will last for this amount of time. And sometimes we hear also that this is a really difficult time where the individual doesn't know what the future is going to be as well. And my research shows that actually that's what employers worry about as well. If you think about law and HR and workplace policies, they work with definitives. It's end date, start date, this is going to happen. And actually, life is rarely like that, let alone cancer. So I think there is the key takeaway is you don't have to say to your employer you have cancer when you go for a job, when you're in work, or at whatever stage. But for people who have shared it, they have found that has been helpful. The other thing to say is you don't necessarily need to say you have this type of cancer and this is your diagnosis and here are all of your medical records. You can share what you are comfortable with. For some people, it is simply, I'm going through some health stuff at the moment. This is how it affects me at work. This is what I really need from you, which will help me be my best. So they don't even say they've got cancer. For other people, it's actually really helpful and important to them to say, I have cancer. So what I would emphasize though is this is a precious part of your life that you need to be comfortable with how you tell it. But your employer's responsibility to make adjustments is not dependent on you telling them you have cancer. I hope that helps and is clear.
That's really, really clear, Andrea, but just building from that, if you need to go to regular appointments for checkups or treatment, should your employer pay you to take that time, or is it upon you to take annual leave for that time?
Yeah, really important question. As both Lou and Claire have said, check your policies. It really does differ in different organisations. If you're in a bigger organisation, you are likely to have some type of time off policy. It might be called disability leave, it might be called personal leave, it might be looking after you leave, I saw the other day. That is where your employer is being kind and saying, we will pay you to have the day off in these situations. Back to reasonable adjustments. For employers who don't have those policies in place, your employer only has to do what they can reasonably do. If you are in a small employer of 2 people and you need to go to appointments 3 days a week for a year, that's less doable than an appointment once a fortnight or once a month in a bigger organisation. So speak to your employer about what you need, hear them out, prepare for that conversation, and make sure that it's collaborative from you as well as them, and also check out your time off policies that your employer has.
Great. Okay, so if you're able to take a bit of ownership for yourself, that's great, and if not, find an ally in the organisation, a manager or an HR person to help you do that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you. Amy, I've got a question here for you. Somebody is asking, how long does ESA last for when you're working?
Okay, good question. It's a very grey answer, I'm afraid, because it really does depend on the nature of your illness. So what I would say is, don't worry about it too much. The DWP will do their own reviews, usually after a year, after 2 years, whenever they see fit. They'll send you a form out, you'll fill that in and explain what your difficulties are now, and then they will make a decision. So it really does vary, so I can't give you a concrete answer, but just wait for them to send you a form, and they will leave you alone for a good year, I would have thought, especially if you've got a lymphoma diagnosis.
Thank you. I think the message for everybody who is listening or watching this that maybe does feel they need to is seek some advice, isn't it, Amy, to find somebody, a Maggie Centre or Citizens Advice Centre or somewhere that can help you go through the minefield that is the benefit system.
Exactly.
Actually, Dallas, I will say, reach out, and Maggie's is brilliant, because I contacted them actually more to do with the getting my finances in order, because of just getting information about debts and things, because I was worried about the impact that I'd leave behind if I was gone, like what all of that would mean. So I did reach out for advice just to get my finances and get things in order from that perspective, and they were really, really helpful. Just helped to take a weight off my shoulders.
Indeed, yeah, thanks, Claire. I mean, not everybody is lucky enough to have a Maggie Centre near them, so please do reach out to other benefits agencies, won't you all? Possibly, yes. Last question for you, Angela. In a nutshell, a couple of people have been asking about medical retirement on grounds of ill health, and obviously for us today, cancer and lymphoma. Have you got any quick advice for people that feel they may have to do that or are being asked to do that?
Yeah, I'm very quickly, I think 2 things. So early retirement or ill health retirement, whatever your preference of your employer's language is, it can add a huge amount of quality of life to people. When you can take early retirement, health related, again, I'm really sorry to say this answer again, does depend on your pension provider as well. So you can, for some providers it's 50, you have to be 55 years old, but other pension providers let you do it sooner. I think the other thing, very quickly, alongside considering ill health retirement, what we find is that a lot of people are hugely helped just by changing their job, and it's not necessarily retirement, ill health retirement that's needed. It's just a career change, different type of work, different hours. So absolutely consider ill health retirement if you think that's for you, but also there are so many other options that might also suit you that you didn't even imagine, and speak to friends and people who have been through it. we find that where people who have considered ill health retirement have actually had years more of working in really different jobs they have really loved, and they didn't know that was possible.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. Thank you. Sadly, we've already come to the end of our hour together. I feel like we could have gone on the entire afternoon, but I want to say massive thanks to Angela, to Amy, to Lou and to Claire for joining me for this hour. It's been absolutely fascinating. For those of you who are listening or watching, if you've got burning questions or you've been affected by this webinar, please don't hesitate to get in contact with us at Lymphoma Action. Ring our helpline, email our helpline, have a live chat with us. We are there for you with lots of information and lots of support. But for now, thank you, panel. That's been just brilliant, and bye for now.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.